Damien Cross could not breathe. He sat alone at his desk, one hand pressed to his chest, the other reaching for a drawer that would not open fast enough. His lungs felt like they had folded in on themselves. The room spun. He tried to call out, but no sound came. This was the moment he had feared for 2 years, the moment his body finally betrayed him in front of no one at all. He had built an empire out of fear and precision. Men twice his size stepped aside when he walked past. Rivals spoke his name in whispers. Yet none of them knew that the man who controlled half the city's shipping docks could be brought to his knees by something as small as his own lungs failing to fill with air. His inhaler was empty. He had used the last dose that morning and forgotten to replace it, too consumed with a warning that had arrived at his gate the night before. A single envelope, no return address, containing 3 words, "We are close." The Hale family had been circling him for months, waiting for a crack in his walls. He never imagined the crack would come from inside his own chest. The desk lamp flickered. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. He thought of the men downstairs, his personal guards, close enough to hear him if he could only manage to shout. He tried once. It came out as a whisper swallowed by the thick carpet and heavier silence of the study. Then the door creaked. A small figure stood in the doorway, barefoot, hair messy from sleep. Mia, the maid's daughter, 3 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit in one hand and something small and plastic in the other. She was not supposed to be on this floor. The staff wing was on the other side of the house, and her mother, Elena, always kept her close at night. Mia blinked at him with the calm curiosity only a child could have in a moment like this. She did not see a dangerous man. She saw someone struggling to breathe, the same way she sometimes struggled when her own chest grew tight. She toddled forward without hesitation, climbed onto the leather chair beside his desk, and held out her hand. In her palm sat a small inhaler, pink and worn at the edges, with a cartoon sticker peeling off the side. Damien stared at it through blurred vision. His mind, starving for oxygen, could barely process what was happening. The girl pressed the inhaler into his hand and, in a voice too steady for someone her age, said the only thing she knew to say when her own chest hurt. "Breathe slow, like Mommy says." He did not think. His body acted on instinct alone. He brought the inhaler to his lips and pressed down, drawing in the medicine meant for a toddler's small lungs, praying it would be enough to keep him conscious until real help could come. The relief was not immediate, but it was enough. Air trickled back into his chest. The room stopped spinning quite so violently. He gripped the edge of the desk and forced himself to breathe the way she had told him. Slow, counted, deliberate. Mia watched him with wide eyes, still holding her rabbit, waiting to see if her medicine had worked the way it always worked for her. By the time Elena burst through the door, pale and breathless from searching the house for her missing daughter, she found Damien Cross slumped in his chair, with color slowly returning to his face, and her 3-year-old sitting calmly beside him, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Elena froze. Her eyes went from her daughter to the empty inhaler in Damien's hand, and understanding crashed over her all at once. She recognized that inhaler. It was Mia's only one. The spare had broken weeks ago and she had not yet found the money to replace it. Panic rose in her throat, sharper than any fear she had for herself. "She has asthma too," Elena said quickly, stepping forward and lifting Mia off the chair, pulling her close. "She should not have been up here. I am sorry, sir. I will keep her downstairs from now on. Please, I need to get her more medicine before morning. She cannot go without it." Damien tried to speak, but his throat was still raw. He held up a hand, asking for a moment, and Elena stopped, terrified she had said too much, terrified of what a man like him might do to a maid whose child had wandered into his private study uninvited. The silence stretched long enough for her heart to pound against her ribs. Finally, Damien managed a single word: "Doctor." Elena blinked, confused, until she realized he was not asking for help for himself. He was already reaching for the phone on his desk, dialing a number she did not recognize, his voice weak but clear enough to give an order that had nothing to do with punishment and everything to do with a little girl's empty inhaler. "Send someone tonight," he said into the phone. "For a child, immediately." Elena stood frozen, Mia's small arms wrapped around her neck, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. She had worked in this house for 2 years, cleaning floors that cost more than her yearly wage, dusting shelves lined with things she could never afford to break. She had learned early that the safest thing to do around Damien Cross was to stay invisible. Speak only when spoken to. Never ask questions. Never draw attention. And now, her daughter's face was the last thing he had seen before his own body nearly gave out. He set the phone down and looked at her, his breathing still uneven but steadying with each passing second. There was something different in his expression, something Elena had never seen from him before. Not the cold authority he wore like armor in front of his men. Something closer to disbelief. "She saved my life," he said quietly, as if he were still trying to convince himself it was true. She only held her daughter tighter and waited, bracing herself for whatever came next, because in her experience, moments like this in houses like this one rarely ended without a price. But Damien did not raise his voice. He did not threaten her, did not tell her to pack her things and leave before sunrise. He simply sat there, staring at the small pink inhaler still resting in his palm, turning it over slowly between his fingers, as though it were something far more valuable than plastic and cheap medicine. "Take her back to bed," he finally said, "and Elena, stay close to her tonight. If she needs anything, my staff will get it. Anything at all." Elena nodded, too stunned to form a full sentence, and carried her daughter out of the study, Mia already drifting back to sleep against her shoulder, unaware that she had just changed the course of 2 lives she barely understood. Behind her, Damien remained in his chair long after the door closed, staring at the space where the little girl had stood only minutes ago. He thought about the years he had spent building walls so high that no one could reach him, walls meant to protect an empire that had slowly turned into a prison of his own making. He thought about how none of his men, none of his money, none of his carefully guarded secrets had been able to save him tonight. A 3-year-old, with a broken pink inhaler, had done what all of it could not. He did not sleep for the rest of that night. Instead, he sat by the window of his study, watching the lights of the city he controlled flicker in the darkness, turning over a single thought that refused to leave him alone. For the first time in years, Damien Cross did not feel powerful. He felt seen. And somewhere in the staff wing of his own house, a maid lay awake beside her sleeping daughter, wondering what tomorrow would bring, unaware that the man upstairs had already begun to change because of the small, quiet kindness her daughter had offered without a second thought. Neither of them could have guessed how far that single night would carry them, or how much it would cost before it was over. The house was quiet by the time morning came, but nothing about it felt the same. Damien woke from a shallow, restless sleep in his chair, his neck stiff, his chest still faintly tight from the night before. Sunlight spilled across the study floor, catching on the small pink inhaler he had placed carefully on his desk, rather than throwing away. He stared at it for a long moment before standing, testing his breath, relieved to find it steady again. He should have felt embarrassed. A man in his position, brought down by his own body in the middle of the night, saved not by his guards or his money, but by a toddler who did not even know his name. Instead, he felt something closer to clarity, as though the fog he had been living in for years had finally begun to lift. Downstairs, the house moved through its usual rhythm. Staff prepared breakfast, guards changed shifts at the gates, and Elena moved quietly through the halls with Mia trailing behind her, clutching her rabbit, unaware of the storm that had passed through the house only hours earlier. Elena had barely slept. She kept replaying the moment she found her daughter in his study, kept waiting for the call that would tell her to gather her things and leave before noon. Every footstep in the hallway made her flinch. Every closed door felt like it might open to deliver bad news. Instead, a new nurse arrived before 9 in the morning, sent directly by Damien's personal doctor, carrying a bag of proper medical supplies meant specifically for a child with asthma. Elena stood in the doorway of the staff kitchen, stunned, as the nurse explained that Mr. Cross had requested a full evaluation for Mia, along with a supply of proper inhalers, and that all costs would be handled quietly through the house accounts. Elena did not understand it. Men like Damien Cross did not concern themselves with the medical needs of a maid's child. Yet here was proof, sitting in a bag on her kitchen counter, that something had shifted overnight. She thanked the nurse, her voice trembling slightly, and once the woman left, she sat down at the small table and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel something other than fear. Upstairs, Damien met with his closest men in the private meeting room he used for matters too sensitive for anyone else's ears. Nathan, his head of security, arrived first, followed by two other men who had been with Damien since the earliest days of his rise. None of them knew about the attack the night before. He intended to keep it that way. "We received another message from Hale," Nathan said, sliding a folded paper across the table. "Same warning. They are testing how close they can get before we respond." Damien studied the paper without reacting outwardly, though inwardly his mind raced back to the fragile state his own body had been in only hours earlier. If Hale's men had chosen that exact night to strike, there would have been nothing he could do to stop them. The thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "Increase patrols along the east wall," he said finally, "and find out who has been talking to them. Someone inside gave them our shipping schedule last month. That was not luck on their part." Nathan nodded, though something in his expression lingered a moment too long, as if there were more he wanted to say but chose not to. Damien noticed it but let it pass. There would be time to press for answers later. The meeting ended, and the men filed out, leaving Damien alone with his thoughts once again. He found himself walking the halls of his own house differently that day, noticing details he had ignored for years: the chipped paint near the staff entrance, the narrow, cramped quarters where the household staff slept, so different from the wide, empty luxury of his own wing. He had walked past these things 1,000 times without truly seeing them. He found himself outside the small kitchen where staff took their meals, and through the open door, he saw Elena sitting with Mia, helping her practice breathing slowly through her new inhaler, patient and gentle, despite the exhaustion clearly written across her face. He did not enter. He simply watched for a moment, taking in the quiet warmth of the scene, so unlike anything in his own carefully guarded life. Then he turned and walked away before either of them noticed him. That evening, he asked his assistant to review Elena's employment file. It was a simple request, one he told himself was only about ensuring his household ran properly. But as he read through the details, something in him tightened uncomfortably. Elena had worked in his house for 2 years, hired quietly after her husband left when Mia was still a baby. Her wages were modest, barely enough to cover rent in the small apartment she shared with her daughter across town, let alone the cost of proper medical care. She had never once requested a raise, never complained, never asked for anything beyond what was already agreed upon. He thought of his own beginnings, the years before he had money or power, when survival meant making impossible choices just to get through another day. He recognized the same quiet determination in her file, in the careful, deliberate way she had built a life for her daughter, despite having so little to build it with. He closed the file and sat in silence for a long while, the weight of the previous night settling over him in a way that had nothing to do with his lungs, and everything to do with the strange, uncomfortable realization that he had been living in the same house as this woman and her daughter for 2 years, without truly seeing either of them. The next few days passed with a strange, careful tension. Elena noticed small changes throughout the house, extra staff assigned to lighter duties, a standing order that Mia was welcome in any part of the house she wished to explore. A quiet increase in her own wages that appeared without explanation in her next payment, enough to finally cover the medical costs she had been quietly struggling to manage on her own for months. She did not know how to make sense of any of it. Part of her wanted to ask Damien directly what had changed, but every time she found herself near him in the hallways, the words caught in her throat. He was not an easy man to approach, even now, even after everything. Damien, for his part, found himself unable to stop thinking about the night in his study. He replayed the moment often, the small hand offering him the inhaler without hesitation, the calm voice telling him to breathe slowly. It had been a long time since anyone in his life had offered him anything without expecting something in return. One afternoon, nearly a week after the incident, he found himself walking past the garden where Mia often played under Elena's careful watch. The little girl spotted him first, waving enthusiastically despite Elena's quiet attempt to guide her attention elsewhere. "Mister," Mia called out, holding up a small toy. "Look what Grace gave me." Damien paused, glancing toward Elena, who looked mortified that her daughter had called out to him so casually. He offered the smallest hint of a smile, something rare enough that it startled his own guard standing nearby. "That is a very nice toy," he said, his voice softer than anyone in the house had ever heard it. Elena stepped forward quickly, apologizing, pulling Mia gently closer. "I am sorry, sir. She does not understand that she should not bother you." Damien shook his head. "She is not bothering me." The words hung in the air between them, simple, but heavy with meaning, neither of them fully understood yet. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for any trace of the cold authority she had come to expect from him, but found only something quieter, something almost hesitant. For the first time since that night, they stood together without fear, driving the moment, if only for a few seconds, before the pressures of his world pulled him away again. As he walked back toward the house, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Nathan. Another warning had arrived at the gate, this one more direct than the last. The Hale family was no longer content to wait quietly on the edges of his territory. Damien read the message twice, his jaw tightening, the fragile peace of the last few minutes slipping away as quickly as it had arrived. He knew, even as he walked deeper into the house, that whatever was beginning between him and the quiet woman who cleaned his floors, it would not be simple. Not with a war closing in around them both. But for reasons he could not fully explain, even as danger gathered outside his gates, he found himself unwilling to let go of the small, unexpected warmth that had entered his life through a 3-year-old's outstretched hand. 2 weeks passed, and the fragile peace inside the house grew more complicated with every passing day. Damien had never allowed himself to feel comfortable around anyone who worked for him. Trust was a currency he spent carefully, if at all. Yet somehow, without quite meaning to, he had begun seeking out small moments with Elena and Mia that had nothing to do with debts or gratitude. He found himself lingering near the garden in the evenings, timing his walks to coincide with the hour Mia liked to chase butterflies before dinner. He told himself it meant nothing, that he was simply checking on the household as any employer should. Elena knew better, though she never said so aloud. She had begun to notice things about him that no one else seemed to see, perhaps because no one else bothered to look. The way his shoulders tensed whenever his phone rang late at night, the quiet exhaustion behind his eyes on the mornings after those calls, the careful, controlled way he moved through his own house, as though he were always bracing for something to go wrong. She recognized exhaustion because she carried her own. Raising Mia alone, working long hours, hiding her daughter's medical needs from a world that rarely made room for struggling single mothers, had taught her to read tiredness in other people, the way some read weather. Damien Cross, for all his power and money, was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. One evening, as she folded laundry in the small staff room near the kitchen, Grace, the house's longtime cook, and the closest thing Elena had to a friend inside these walls, leaned against the doorway with her arms crossed. "He has never once asked about a staff member's family before," Grace said, watching Elena carefully. "Not in all the years I have worked here." Elena kept her eyes on the laundry, though her hands slowed. "He is only being kind because of what happened. It does not mean anything more than that." Grace raised an eyebrow but said nothing further, letting the silence speak for itself. Elena appreciated her restraint, even as her own mind refused to settle on any single explanation for the strange shift she felt happening around her. That night, after Mia had fallen asleep, Elena sat by the small window in their shared room, staring out at the distant lights of the main house. She thought about the man upstairs, so different from the version of him whispered about by people outside these walls. She thought about the fear that still lived deep in her chest whenever she remembered exactly what kind of man he was, the kind of business that filled his days, the kind of danger that followed him everywhere he went. And yet, she could not deny the quiet gentleness she had witnessed more than once now, in small moments no one else was meant to see. Meanwhile, deep within his own wing of the house, Damien sat across from his personal doctor, submitting to the kind of examination he had avoided for years out of stubborn pride. The doctor listened to his lungs carefully, checked his blood pressure, and finally sat back with a serious expression. "Your condition has worsened," the doctor said plainly. "The stress you carry, the hours you keep, none of it helps. If you continue ignoring this, next time there may not be a child nearby to save you." Damien said nothing, staring at the wall behind the doctor's shoulder, the memory of that night pressing uncomfortably close again. He had built his entire life around the belief that weakness could not be shown, not to his men, not to his rivals, not even to himself. Yet here he was, forced to confront the truth that his body had limits, his will alone could not overcome. "I will manage it," he said finally, though even he was not entirely certain he believed his own words. The doctor did not press further, simply leaving behind a revised treatment plan and a stronger warning about the dangers of neglecting his health any longer. Damien sat alone in the room long after the doctor left, turning the pink inhaler over in his hand again, a habit he had developed without quite noticing. Downstairs, tension of a different kind was building. Marco, one of Damien's longest-serving captains, stood in the shadows of the east hallway, watching the quiet interactions between his boss and the household staff with a growing sense of unease. He had worked alongside Damien for over a decade, had helped build the foundation of the empire they now controlled together. He did not understand this sudden softness, this distraction pulling his boss's attention toward a maid and her child, while real threats gathered outside their walls. Marco had grown up believing that softness in leadership invited disaster. He had seen it happen before, in other families, other empires that crumbled the moment their leaders allowed personal weakness to cloud their judgment. He feared, quietly and privately, that Damien was making the same mistake now, at the worst possible moment, with the Hale family circling closer every week. That fear, left unspoken and unchecked, would soon curdle into something far more dangerous than simple disagreement. For now, though, the house remained quiet on the surface, its true tensions hidden beneath careful smiles and polite distance. Damien continued his evening walks near the garden. Elena continued her careful balance between gratitude and caution, and Mia, blissfully unaware of any of it, continued offering the same easy warmth to everyone around her, unaware that her small, simple kindness weeks earlier had set in motion changes far larger than anyone in that house yet realized. Somewhere across the city, in a quiet office lit by dim lamps, Vincent Hale studied a folder full of information about Damien Cross's household, his finger tapping thoughtfully against a photograph of the estate's east wall. He had heard whispers, small pieces of gossip carried through informants embedded deep within Damien's world, about a shift in the man's habits, a distraction, a new weakness worth exploiting. Vincent smiled slightly, setting the folder aside. "Everyone has a weakness," he murmured to himself. "It seems Damien Cross has finally shown us his." Outside, the night settled heavily over the city, carrying with it the quiet promise that whatever peace had begun to grow inside Damien's house would soon be tested in ways none of them could yet imagine. The days that followed carried a strange, uneasy rhythm, like a held breath waiting to break. Damien found himself pulled in two directions at once. By day, he sat through tense meetings with his captains, reviewing security reports that grew more troubling with each passing week. The Hale family had grown bolder, their warnings sharper, their patience visibly thinning. By evening, he found himself drawn, almost against his own will, toward the quiet corner of his house, where Elena and Mia lived their small, careful life. He told himself repeatedly that his continued attention toward them was simply gratitude, a debt he intended to repay properly before stepping back into the distance that should exist between a man like him and the people who worked for him. Yet every evening, he found new reasons to walk past the garden, new excuses to ask after Mia's health, new moments where he lingered longer than necessary in conversations with Elena that had nothing to do with household matters at all. Elena noticed too, though she tried not to let herself hope for anything more than his continued goodwill. She had learned long ago that hope could be a dangerous thing for someone in her position, easily crushed by circumstances far beyond her control. Still, there were moments, quiet and unguarded, when she caught herself smiling at something he said, or noticing the particular way his expression softened whenever Mia ran toward him with some new small treasure to show him. One such evening, as the sun dipped low over the estate, Damien found Elena alone near the garden, Mia already asleep inside after a long day of play. Elena sat on a stone bench, staring out at the fading light, a rare moment of stillness in her otherwise demanding days. He approached slowly, unsure why he felt the need to explain himself, yet unable to stop the words once they began. "I never properly thanked you," he said, settling onto the far end of the bench, careful to keep a respectful distance. "For what your daughter did that night, for everything since." Elena turned to look at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice, so different from the controlled authority he carried in front of everyone else. "She did not owe you anything," she said quietly. "She just wanted to help. That is who she is." Damien nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the darkening sky. "She saved my life without knowing what that even meant, without knowing who I am, or what I have done to build the life I live. I have spent years surrounded by people who only give me things because they want something in return. She wanted nothing." Elena studied him carefully, weighing her next words. "That is not always a bad thing, you know, wanting nothing in return. Maybe you have simply forgotten what that feels like." Her words landed heavier than she intended, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet evening settling comfortably around them, despite everything unspoken between them. Their fragile peace was interrupted by the sharp buzz of Damien's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting instantly from quiet reflection to sharp focus. Elena watched the change happen, the way his shoulders squared, the way warmth drained from his face, and was replaced by something colder, more guarded. "I need to go," he said, standing quickly. "Stay close to the house tonight, please." Elena did not ask questions, though worry settled heavily in her chest as she watched him disappear toward the main house, his pace quickening with every step. Inside, Nathan waited with troubling news. A shipment meant to arrive quietly at the docks had been intercepted. The details leaked well before it ever left the warehouse. Someone with access to sensitive information had shared it with the Hale family, and this time, the leak had cost them more than money. 2 of Damien's men had been caught in the resulting confrontation, both injured badly enough to require immediate medical attention. "This is the 3rd leak in 2 months, Nathan said grimly. "Someone close to us is talking." Damien's jaw tightened as he absorbed the news, his mind racing through the list of people with access to information sensitive enough to cause this level of damage. The list was short, and every name on it belonged to someone he had trusted for years. Marco entered the room moments later, his expression carefully neutral, though something in his posture seemed slightly too rigid, slightly too controlled for a man simply reacting to bad news. "We need to tighten everything," Marco said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Restrict information further. Trust no one outside the inner circle until we find the leak." Damien studied him for a long moment, something uneasy settling in the back of his mind, though he could not yet place exactly why Marco's urgency felt different from genuine concern. He pushed the feeling aside for now, too consumed by the immediate crisis to examine it further. "Handle it," he said finally. "Find out who is talking, and do it quietly. I do not want panic spreading through the ranks." As the meeting dispersed, Damien remained behind, staring at the security reports scattered across his desk, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him harder than usual. He thought briefly of the quiet moment on the garden bench only an hour earlier, the warmth of Elena's words, the simple honesty in her voice. It felt like it belonged to an entirely different life, one he was not entirely certain he still had the right to hold on to. Late that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Damien found himself standing outside the staff wing, staring at the dim light still glowing faintly from Elena's window. He did not knock. He simply stood there for a long moment, caught between the 2 worlds now pulling at him from opposite directions, before finally turning and walking back toward his own wing alone. Inside her room, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the worry that had settled over her since watching him leave so abruptly. She did not yet know the full weight of the danger gathering outside the estate walls, but she felt it nonetheless, a quiet unease she could not fully explain. Neither of them could have known, as they lay awake in their separate corners of the same house, that the danger circling closer each day was about to force its way directly into the fragile world they had both begun, cautiously and quietly, to build together. 3 days later, everything changed. It began with a single warning, delivered not to the front gate, but directly to Damien's private phone. a message meant to unsettle him in a way no formal letter ever could. The message contained no threats written in words. It contained a photograph, taken from somewhere close enough to the estate to prove just how far Hale's reach had grown. The photograph showed the garden, the same quiet corner where Damien and Elena had spoken only nights earlier, with a small red mark drawn carefully around the stone bench. Damien stared at the image for a long time, his chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with his illness this time. Whatever restraint Vincent Hale had shown until now was clearly gone. The message was simple, even without words. They knew exactly where to strike, and they wanted him to know it. He called an emergency meeting within the hour, gathering his most trusted men in the private room, usually reserved for matters of highest sensitivity. Nathan arrived first, his expression grim after seeing the photograph forwarded to his own phone. Marco arrived shortly after, along with 2 other senior men who had served the family for years. "They know about the garden," Damien said flatly, sliding his phone across the table for the others to see. "They know enough about this house to send a message like this. That means someone inside these walls gave them details only a handful of people should have access to." The room fell into tense silence, each man exchanging careful glances, none willing to be the first to speak. Nathan finally broke the quiet, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "We increase security around the entire property immediately. Full lockdown until we determine how deep this leak goes." Damien nodded, though his mind had already begun racing toward a more immediate concern, one far more personal than strategy or security protocols: Elena and Mia. If Hale's men knew enough about the garden to send a photograph like this, it meant they likely knew about the 2 people who had become an unmistakable part of his daily life over the past few weeks. He stood abruptly, cutting the meeting short, despite the surprised looks from his men. "Double the guards near the staff wing immediately," he ordered. "No one enters or leaves without clearance. I want eyes on that section of the house at all times starting now." Marco's expression flickered, something unreadable passing behind his eyes before he masked it with practiced calm. "You are pulling resources away from the main perimeter for staff quarters," he said carefully. "Is that wise, given everything we are facing right now?" Damien turned toward him sharply, his patience thin. "That is not a request, Marco. Handle it." Marco said nothing further, though the tension in his jaw remained long after Damien left the room, the other men filing out slowly behind him, each carrying their own private concerns about the sudden shift in priorities happening within their carefully controlled world. Damien found Elena in the small kitchen near the staff wing, helping Mia with her evening meal, unaware of the storm gathering just outside the walls of their quiet, ordinary moment. He paused in the doorway, watching them for a brief second before stepping inside, his expression carefully controlled despite the urgency pressing against his chest. Elena looked up immediately, sensing something wrong the moment she saw his face. "What happened?" she asked quietly, setting down the spoon she had been using to feed Mia. "I need you to trust me," he said, his voice low and steady despite the tension clearly running through him. "There is a situation developing, something dangerous. I am increasing security around this part of the house, and I need both of you to stay close, inside, until I can be certain everything is under control." Elena's stomach tightened with fear, though she kept her expression calm for Mia's sake. "Is this because of us?" she asked carefully. "Did something happen because of what happened before, in your study?" Damien hesitated, unwilling to lie to her, yet equally unwilling to burden her with the full weight of the danger now circling his empire. "This is not your fault," he said finally. "This is mine. I have enemies who have decided that anyone close to me is worth using against me. I will not let that happen. Not to you, and not to her." Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for any trace of the cold, controlled businessman she had first come to know 2 years ago. She found only fear, quiet and unfamiliar, hidden beneath the practiced calm he wore for everyone else. "We will stay inside," she said finally, reaching over to pull Mia gently closer, as if the simple act of holding her daughter could shield her from dangers neither of them fully understood. Damien nodded, relief flickering briefly across his face, before the weight of everything ahead settled back over him. He turned to leave, pausing only once at the doorway, glancing back at the 2 of them with an expression Elena had never seen from him before, something raw and unguarded. I will not let anything happen to either of you, he said quietly, before disappearing down the hallway, leaving Elena alone with her daughter, and a fear that had grown far larger than anything she had ever faced within these walls before. Outside, the night grew heavier, carrying with it the quiet certainty that whatever fragile peace had existed inside that house over the past few weeks was about to be tested in ways none of them could yet fully imagine. 2 days passed in a tense, uneasy quiet, the entire estate holding its breath under the weight of increased security and unanswered questions. Damien barely slept, spending his nights reviewing reports and his days pacing the halls, his mind constantly split between protecting his empire and protecting the two people who had somehow become the most important part of his life, without his ever fully realizing it until now. Elena kept Mia close during those days, rarely venturing beyond the kitchen and their small shared room, watching the increased number of guards patrolling near their wing with a mixture of gratitude and quiet fear. She had never seen the house so tense, never felt the weight of Damien's world pressing so heavily against the fragile bubble she had built for her daughter. On the third night, everything came apart at once. It began with the lights flickering across the entire property, a deliberate disruption meant to create chaos before the true attack began. Alarms blared through the halls moments later, followed by shouting near the main gate, as Damien's guards scrambled to respond to an assault none of them had fully anticipated, despite days of preparation. Damien was in his study when the first alarm sounded, and his instincts took over immediately, years of experience guiding him, even as fear for Elena and Mia's safety threatened to overwhelm his focus. He grabbed his phone, dialing Nathan's number as he moved quickly toward the staff wing, ignoring the protests of 2 guards, who tried to redirect him toward the safe room reserved for situations exactly like this one. I am not hiding while they are in danger, he snapped, pushing past the guards, his chest already beginning to tighten under the strain of the sudden physical exertion, combined with the rising panic clawing at his thoughts. He found Elena in the hallway near the kitchen, Mia clutched tightly in her arms, both of them frozen in fear as the sound of gunfire echoed somewhere near the eastern side of the property. Elena's eyes met his, wide with terror, though she remained remarkably composed given the chaos surrounding them. We need to move, Damien said quickly, guiding them both toward the reinforced room hidden beneath the main house, a space few people beyond his closest guards even knew existed. Stay here, no matter what you hear. I will come back for you. Elena grabbed his arm before he could turn away, her grip surprisingly strong despite the fear evident in her trembling hands. Please, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Do not go out there, not like this. Your chest, I know how bad it can get under stress. Damien paused, the weight of her concern landing somewhere deep inside him, unfamiliar and overwhelming amid the chaos surrounding them. I have to, he said quietly. This is because of me. I will not let anyone reach either of you. He guided them into the safe room, sealing the heavy door behind them, before turning back toward the sounds of chaos still echoing through the halls, his own breathing already beginning to strain under the pressure of everything happening at once. He forced himself to focus, drawing on every ounce of control he had built over years of living in a world that demanded constant composure, regardless of personal cost. Outside, his men fought to repel the attack, Nathan directing efforts near the main gate, while Damien moved cautiously through the halls, checking for any breach near the safe room where Elena and Mia remained hidden. It was there, in the dim hallway near the staff wing, that he found Marco standing suspiciously close to a section of the security system that should have been locked down hours earlier. Marco froze the moment he noticed Damien watching him, his expression shifting quickly from surprise to something far more calculated. Damien's stomach dropped as understanding crashed over him all at once, the pieces of the past few months finally clicking into place with painful clarity. You? Damien said quietly, his voice dangerously calm despite the chaos surrounding them both. You are the one who has been talking to Hale. Marco did not bother denying it, his expression hardening into something cold and resentful. You lost focus the moment that Maid's brat handed you an inhaler, he spat. You let a woman and her child distract you, while the rest of us tried to hold this family together. I did what was necessary to protect what we built, even if you were too blind to see it needed protecting from your own weakness. Damien's chest tightened painfully, though this time, the strain came as much from fury as from his condition. Years of trust shattered in an instant, replaced by a cold clarity he had not felt in a very long time. "You call loyalty weakness," Damien said, stepping closer despite the danger clearly radiating from Marco's tense posture. "I call it the only thing that ever mattered in this family. And you sold it the moment it became inconvenient for you." Before Marco could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, Nathan and two other guards arriving just in time to witness the tense standoff unfolding before them. Marco's eyes darted toward the exit, weighing his chances, before resignation finally settled over his expression. "It was never supposed to go this far," he muttered, almost to himself, as Nathan moved forward to restrain him. Damien said nothing further, turning away from the man who had betrayed him, his focus already shifting back toward the safe room where Elena and Mia waited, unaware of just how close the danger had truly come to reaching them from within their own walls. By the time the chaos outside finally settled, the attackers repelled and the immediate threat neutralized, Damien made his way back to the safe room, his chest aching with exhaustion, both physical and emotional, the weight of Marco's betrayal settling heavily over everything that had happened that night. He opened the door slowly, finding Elena still holding Mia close, both of them safe, both of them staring up at him with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. He crossed the room without hesitation, kneeling before them, his carefully controlled composure finally beginning to crack under the weight of everything that had happened. "It is over," he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You are safe now, both of you." Elena reached out, resting her hand gently against his arm, offering the same quiet steadiness she had offered him weeks earlier, on that garden bench, before any of this danger had entered their lives. Damien closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, to simply accept comfort rather than provide it. Outside the safe room, the estate remained in chaos, guards working quickly to secure the property and assess the damage caused by the attack. But inside that small, quiet room, something had shifted permanently between the three of them, forged in the fire of a danger that had nearly cost them everything. None of them yet knew how deeply that night would reshape the course of their lives, or how much still remained unresolved in the aftermath of Marco's betrayal. But for now, in the quiet safety of that hidden room, they simply held on to each other, grateful to have survived a night none of them would soon forget. The days following the attack moved slower than any Damien could remember, each one carrying the heavy weight of decisions that could no longer be avoided. Marco's betrayal had cut deeper than any physical wound could have, not because of the information he had given away, but because of how long it had gone unnoticed, hidden behind years of trust that Damien now realized had been built on assumptions rather than truth. He spent long hours reviewing everything Marco had access to, tracing the damage back through months of leaked shipments and compromised plans, piecing together a picture far more troubling than he had initially understood. The Hale family had been closer to destroying everything he built than he ever realized, and only the failed attack on his estate, driven by Marco's misguided urgency to prove his loyalty after being confronted, had exposed the full extent of the danger before it was too late. Nathan worked closely with him during those difficult days, helping restructure security protocols, tightening access to sensitive information, and slowly rebuilding trust among the remaining senior men who had proven their loyalty during the crisis. It was exhausting work, made heavier by the constant awareness of how close disaster had come to reaching not just the empire Damien had built, but the two people who had become far more important to him than any business ever could be. Elena, for her part, struggled with her own weight of understanding in the aftermath. She had always known Damien's world carried danger, but experiencing it directly, holding her daughter close in that hidden room while chaos raged outside, had changed something fundamental in how she viewed the life she had unknowingly become entangled in. She found herself sitting with Grace late one evening, turning a cup of tea slowly in her hands, her mind still replaying the fear of that night. "I do not know if I can keep living like this," she admitted quietly. "Every day wondering if today is the day something happens to her because of where we live, because of who I work for." Grace studied her carefully, understanding the weight behind her words. "But you have also seen the man he is becoming because of you both," she said gently. "That counts for something too, does it not? Elena did not have an answer, her thoughts too tangled between fear and something far more complicated to easily untangle in a single conversation. Damien, meanwhile, found himself facing his own reckoning, not just with the business he had built, but with the health he had spent years neglecting in favor of maintaining an image of unshakable strength. His doctor's warnings echoed louder in his mind now than ever before, especially after experiencing firsthand how quickly his condition could turn dangerous under the stress of a crisis like the one they had just survived. He requested a full evaluation, agreeing finally to the treatment plan he had resisted for years, understanding now with painful clarity just how much he stood to lose if he continued pretending his weakness did not exist. It was not an easy decision, admitting vulnerability after years of carefully guarding against it, but the memory of that night in his study, and every quiet moment since, had taught him that strength did not always mean hiding what threatened to break you. One evening, nearly a week after the attack, he found Elena alone in the garden again, the same quiet corner where their fragile connection had first begun to grow, beyond simple gratitude. She sat on the stone bench, staring out at the darkening sky, Mia asleep inside, under Grace's careful watch. He approached slowly, settling beside her without the same careful distance he had maintained during their last conversation in this spot. Elena glanced at him, noting the change immediately, though she said nothing, waiting instead for him to speak first. "I have spent my whole life building walls," he said quietly, staring out at the same darkening sky she had been watching, keeping everyone at a distance, believing that was the only way to survive in this world. Marco believed that too, in his own way. He thought caring about anything beyond the business made a person weak. Elena turned to look at him fully now, something soft in her expression despite the exhaustion still lingering from the events of the past week. "And what do you believe now?" she asked quietly. Damien was quiet for a long moment, weighing his next words carefully, aware of just how much rested on his honesty in this moment. "I believe I was wrong," he finally said. "I believe the walls I built kept me safe from a lot of things, but they also kept me from ever truly living. And I believe that a little girl with a broken inhaler taught me more about what actually matters than anyone else has in years." Elena's eyes glistened slightly, though she blinked the emotion back, unwilling to let herself fully surrender to the vulnerability of the moment just yet. "What are you saying, Damien?" she asked softly, using his first name for perhaps the first time since she had known him. He turned to face her fully now, his expression open in a way she had never witnessed from him before. "I am saying that I do not want either of you to simply be people I feel indebted to anymore. I want you both in my life, not out of obligation, but because these past weeks with you and Mia have shown me a version of myself I thought I had lost a long time ago." Elena's breath caught slightly, the weight of his words settling over her carefully, mingling with all the fear and uncertainty she had carried since the moment Mia first wandered into his study weeks earlier. "This is not simple," she said quietly, though there was no rejection in her voice, only honest acknowledgement of everything still unresolved between them. "Your world is dangerous. I have a daughter to protect." "I know," Damien said, reaching over slowly to take her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. "I am not asking you to ignore that danger. I am asking you to let me build something safer, for both of you, starting now. I have already begun making changes, restructuring everything Marco touched, strengthening protections around this house permanently, not just as a reaction to what happened, but because I finally understand what I actually have to lose." Elena did not pull her hand away. Instead, she allowed herself, for the first time since that terrifying night in the safe room, to simply sit with him in comfortable silence, the weight of everything unspoken between them finally beginning to feel less like fear and more like possibility. Above them, the stars began to emerge across the darkening sky, quiet witnesses to a moment neither of them fully understood yet, but both of them, for entirely different reasons, finally felt ready to embrace. Weeks passed, and slowly, carefully, the estate began to feel like something closer to a home rather than a fortress under constant threat. Damien followed through on every promise he had made that evening in the garden. Security remained tight, but no longer suffocating, structured around genuine protection rather than paranoid control. He worked closely with Nathan to rebuild trust among his remaining men, promoting those who had proven their loyalty during the crisis, and slowly, methodically, severing every connection Marco had left behind within the organization. He also followed through on his own health, attending every appointment his doctor scheduled, adjusting his lifestyle in ways he had resisted for years. It was not an easy transition, learning to prioritize his well-being after a lifetime of ignoring it in favor of maintaining an image of unshakable strength. But each small change brought with it a quiet sense of relief he had not expected to feel. Elena, too, found herself settling into a version of life she had never imagined possible. The fear that once colored every interaction with Damien slowly gave way to something steadier, something built not on gratitude or debt, but on genuine understanding between two people who had each, in their own way, been shaped by years of quietly carrying burdens alone. Mia, blissfully unaware of the complicated journey that had brought the three of them together, simply continued being herself, offering the same easy warmth to everyone around her that she always had. She had grown particularly fond of the garden, spending hours chasing butterflies and collecting small stones she insisted on giving to anyone willing to admire them, including, quite often, Damien himself. One afternoon, nearly 2 months after the attack, Damien found himself sitting on the familiar garden bench, watching Mia chase a particularly stubborn butterfly across the lawn, while Elena sat beside him, laughing softly at her daughter's determined pursuit. It was a simple moment, ordinary in almost every way, yet it carried a weight neither of them had expected to feel this deeply. "I never thought I would have this," Damien admitted quietly, watching Mia stumble happily through the grass. "A life outside of everything I built. I thought that world was the only thing I was capable of having." Elena glanced at him, warmth evident in her expression despite the lingering caution she still carried, a habit built from years of protecting herself and her daughter from disappointment. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I think I was simply waiting for the right people to show me otherwise," he said, reaching over to take her hand, the gesture far more natural now than it had been during their first tentative conversation in this same spot weeks earlier. It was during this quiet moment that Grace approached, carrying an envelope that had just arrived at the gate. Her expression carried a hint of curiosity as she handed it to Damien, unsure of its origin given the lack of any return address. Damien opened it carefully, half expecting another warning from remnants of the Hale family, still nursing their wounds from the failed attack weeks earlier. Instead, he found a simple letter, along with an old photograph that made his breath catch unexpectedly in his throat. The photograph showed Elena, years younger, standing beside a man Damien did not recognize, holding a baby who could only have been Mia shortly after her birth. The letter, written in unfamiliar handwriting, explained quietly that it had come from a distant relative of Elena's former husband, someone who had recently learned of Mia's existence and wished to share information about a modest inheritance left behind, one that had gone unclaimed for years due to lost contact between the families. Elena read the letter slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the unexpected weight of its contents. It was not a large inheritance, nothing that would drastically change their circumstances, but it represented something far more meaningful than money alone. It represented a connection to a piece of Mia's history that Elena had long believed was lost entirely. "I did not expect this," she said quietly, staring at the photograph with an expression caught somewhere between surprise and quiet emotion. "I thought that part of our story was closed forever." Damien watched her carefully, understanding immediately the significance of what she held in her hands. "Sometimes the past finds its way back to us when we least expect it," he said gently. "Not to complicate things, but to remind us of everything that led us to exactly where we are now." Elena looked up at him, something soft and grateful in her expression, before turning her attention back toward Mia, still chasing butterflies across the lawn, blissfully unaware of the quiet significance unfolding behind her. It was in that moment, watching Elena carefully fold the letter and tuck it safely into her pocket, that Damien finally understood something he had been slowly realizing over the past several weeks. Mia's small act of kindness that night in his study had not been an isolated moment of unexpected fortune. It had been the beginning of something far larger, a quiet unraveling of walls he had spent years building, revealing a life he had never allowed himself to imagine could exist alongside the one he had so carefully constructed. That evening, after Mia had fallen asleep and the estate had settled into its familiar quiet rhythm, Damien found himself once again in his study, the same room where everything had begun months earlier. He picked up the small pink inhaler still resting on his desk, turning it over slowly in his hand, the same way he had done countless times since that fateful night. He thought about the years he had spent building an empire meant to protect him from vulnerability, only to discover that true strength had been waiting for him in the quiet, unexpected kindness of a woman and her daughter he had almost failed to see at all. Outside his window, the city lights flickered in the distance, the same view he had stared at that first sleepless night, though everything about how he saw it now felt entirely different. He no longer felt like a man trapped behind walls of his own making. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like a man finally beginning to live. And somewhere within the quiet walls of the house he had once considered nothing more than a fortress, Elena tucked her daughter into bed, glancing toward the window where the same distant lights glimmered softly, allowing herself, cautiously and completely, to imagine a future neither of them had ever expected to find within these walls. What began as a small, desperate act of kindness from a toddler clutching a broken pink inhaler had, over the course of a few short months, reshaped the lives of everyone it touched, proving that even in the most unlikely, most guarded corners of the world, genuine connection could still find a way to break through, one small, quiet moment at a time.